I never thought I'd live to be 78 years old. Most folks like me don't make it past 40 on these Mississippi plantations. But here I am, my hands still scarred from decades of labor, my back still bent from years of cotton fields, and my heart still burning with a pain that time has never dulled. My name is Zelma Cartwright, though for most of my life I was just called Old Zelma, or sometimes nothing at all. Just a gesture, a point, a command. But I had a name. My mama gave it to me before they sold her away when I was just 7 years old. She whispered it to me every night. "You're Zelma. Don't you ever forget who you are, child. Don't you ever forget." I didn't forget. And I didn't forget her other words either. "Save something for yourself, Zelma. Even if it's just a penny, even if it's just a dream. Save something they can't take." So I did. For over 50 years, I saved. Every coin I could hide, every small payment Master Cartwright gave me for extra work beyond my regular duties, mending clothes for white folks in town, delivering laundry, helping birth babies in the middle of the night, I kept it. Not all of it, of course. That would draw suspicion. But enough. Slowly, carefully, I built my secret fortune. The hiding place was perfect. In the kitchen house where I'd worked since I was a girl, there was an old cast-iron stove that sat on brick foundations. Over the years, I'd loosened one of those bricks, hollowed out a space behind it, and there I kept my treasure. Wrapped in oilcloth to keep it dry, hidden in the dark where no one would ever think to look, my gold coins waited. 43 of them. Each one represented months of sacrifice, of going hungry, of working through fever and pain. Those coins were my freedom. Not just mine, my granddaughter Celia's too. She was 16, bright as morning sun, and I'd been planning for years. There were whispers of a man in Natchez who could forge free papers, who could help us get north. 43 gold coins would be enough, just enough. It was a Tuesday morning in March of 1849 when everything shattered. The air was thick with humidity, and storm clouds gathered over the plantation like bruises on dark skin. I was kneading bread dough, my arthritic fingers working through the pain the way they'd learned to do, when I heard Master Cartwright's voice outside the kitchen house. He wasn't alone. His son Thomas was with him, along with the overseer, Mr. Dalton. Their voices carried that particular tone white men used when they were discussing property. Cold, calculating, devoid of any recognition that they were talking about human souls. "Bought 3 of them yesterday," Thomas was saying. "Strong backs, good teeth. The trader said they came from Virginia, used to tobacco work, but they'll adapt to cotton quick enough." My hands stilled in the dough. 3 new people. 3 more souls trapped in this hell. "How much?" Master Cartwright asked. "Got a good price. Found some gold coins in the old kitchen house during repairs last week. Must have been from my grandfather's time, hidden away and forgotten. Covered most of the cost." The world stopped spinning. The air left my lungs. My gold, my coins, my freedom. I must have made a sound, a gasp, a whimper, something, because Mr. Dalton stepped into the kitchen house and looked at me with those pale, cruel eyes that had watched so many of us suffer without a flicker of human compassion. "Something wrong, Zelma?" he asked, his hand resting casually on the whip at his belt. I forced my face into blankness, a skill I'd perfected over 7 decades of survival. "No, sir. Just the rheumatism acting up. This weather brings it on fierce." He studied me for a long moment, then turned away. But I saw it in his eyes, a flicker of suspicion, a question forming. He was a careful man, observant in the way predators are observant. That night, I checked the hiding place. The brick had been moved, clumsily replaced. The oilcloth was gone. The space was empty, swept clean of 50 years of hope. I sat on the cold kitchen floor and let myself cry for the first time in decades. Not loud, never loud. We learned early that tears were private things, dangerous things. But I cried, my old body shaking with the weight of loss. Celia found me there an hour later. She was supposed to be in the quarters, but she'd snuck out, worried because I hadn't come back from the kitchen house. When she saw my face, she knew immediately that something terrible had happened. "Grandmother?" she whispered, kneeling beside me. I told her everything. Watched hope die in her young eyes, the same way it had died in mine so many times before. But then something else flickered there. something fierce and bright that reminded me of my mama. "What are we going to do?" she asked. That question, that simple, dangerous question. Most folks in our position would answer, nothing. What could we do? We were property. We had no rights, no recourse, no power. But I'd lived 78 years. I'd survived things that should have killed me. I'd watched my mama sold away, my husband worked to death in the fields, my daughter die in childbirth because no doctor would come for a woman in bondage. I'd endured, and I'd saved, and I'd hoped. And now, they'd taken even that. "I don't know yet, child," I said, pulling myself up with Celia's help. "But we're going to do something. Those 3 people they bought with my gold, they're suffering because of what was stolen from me. That makes them my responsibility now." Celia looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. But madness and courage often look the same when you have nothing left to lose. The new people arrived 3 days later, chained together in the back of a wagon, their eyes hollow with the particular despair of those who've just lost everything familiar. 2 men and a woman, all young, all terrified. I watched from the kitchen house window as they were processed, documented in Master Cartwright's ledger as property, assigned to the quarters. The woman stumbled as she climbed down from the wagon, weak from the journey, and the overseer struck her across the shoulders with his crop. That's when I knew. I was going to save them. I was going to get my gold back. And somehow, impossibly, we were all going to be free. I just had to figure out how. The new arrivals were given the cabin next to mine and Celia's, a blessing and a curse. It meant I could watch them, learn about them, but it also meant being close to their suffering in those first brutal weeks as they adjusted to plantation life under Master Cartwright's rule. Their names were Samuel, Isaac, and Ruth. Samuel was the oldest, maybe 30, with intelligent eyes that had already learned to hide their thoughts. Isaac was younger, built strong, but carrying himself with a gentleness that worried me. Gentle men didn't last long in the fields. Ruth was somewhere in between, her face marked by old scars that told stories she'd never need to speak aloud. I introduced myself the first Sunday they had free, bringing cornbread I'd made in the kitchen house. Food was the universal language among us, the way we showed care when words were too dangerous or too inadequate. Ruth took the bread with trembling hands. "Thank you, ma'am," she said, her Virginia accent soft and musical. "You didn't have to." "I know I didn't have to," I said, settling myself on their cabin step. My old bones protested, but I ignored them. "I wanted to. You're part of our community now, and we take care of our own when we can." Samuel watched me carefully. He was the cautious one. I could see that. "You've been here long?" he asked. "Since I was 7 years old. 71 years on this land." The number tasted bitter. Nearly 3/4 of a century in bondage. Isaac's eyes widened. 71 years? Lord have mercy. "The Lord hasn't shown much mercy to folks like us," I said, more sharply than I intended. Then I softened. "But we survive anyway. That's our own kind of miracle." Over the next weeks, I learned their stories in fragments, the way such things are always shared. A sentence here, a memory there. Pieces of pain doled out in portions small enough to bear. Samuel had been sold away from his wife and children in Virginia. He'd tried to run back to them twice and carried the scars from his whippings on his back. Isaac had been born free. His parents had purchased their freedom, but he'd been kidnapped by traders and sold south. Ruth had survived 3 different masters, each worse than the last, before landing here. And they'd all been bought with my gold. The knowledge sat in my chest like a stone. These were good people, suffering people, and the money that should have freed me and Celia had instead enslaved them further. The injustice of it threatened to consume me. But anger, I'd learned, was only useful if you could direct it somewhere productive. I began to plan. The first thing I needed was information. How had Thomas Cartwright really found the gold? Had it been accident, or had someone told him? And more importantly, where was it now? Celia became my eyes and ears in the big house. She worked there sometimes, cleaning and serving, and white folks had a way of talking around us like we were furniture, invisible and deaf. "They're keeping it in Master Thomas's room," she reported one evening, her voice barely a whisper as we shelled peas in our cabin. "In a lockbox in his wardrobe. He counts it sometimes, thinks he's going to invest it in more land. More land meant more cotton. More cotton meant more people in bondage. My gold, my sacrifice, funding more suffering. Can you get to it? I asked. Celia's hands stilled. Grandmother, that's stealing. I looked at her steadily. Is it stealing to take back what was stolen from you first? She had no answer for that. None of us did. The whole system we lived under was built on theft of our labor, our freedom, our families, our very selves. Taking back 43 gold coins seemed like a small justice in comparison, but it was dangerous. If we were caught, the consequences would be severe. Not just whipping, possibly death, or sail to the deep south, to the sugar plantations where people died in months instead of years. I couldn't ask Celia to take that risk, but I also couldn't abandon the people my gold had enslaved or give up on the freedom we'd been so close to achieving. Samuel found me in the kitchen house one afternoon, lingering after bringing in firewood. "Can I speak with you, Miss Zelma?" he asked quietly. I glanced around. We were alone. "Speak. I've been watching you. You've been watching us. And I think," he paused, choosing words carefully, "I think you know something about why we're here. Something specific." My heart hammered. "What makes you say that?" "The way you look at us. Not with pity. We get plenty of that. With responsibility, like you feel accountable somehow." His eyes met mine. Am I wrong? I could have lied. Should have lied. But something in his face, in his careful intelligence, made me tell the truth. I told him everything. About the gold, the hiding place, the theft, the bitter irony that my freedom money had bought his chains. When I finished, Samuel was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "So you're planning to steal it back?" "I'm planning to reclaim what's mine." "And then what? Buy freedom for you and your granddaughter?" There was no judgment in his voice, just curiosity. "I don't know anymore," I admitted. "The gold was enough for 2 of us, maybe 3 if we were careful. But now there are 5 of us in this. You, Isaac, Ruth, me, and Celia. I can't leave you here knowing my gold bought your bondage, but I also can't save everyone." Samuel leaned against the kitchen wall, his face thoughtful. "What if you didn't have to choose? What if we all worked together? To do what? To get free, all of us." He held up a hand before I could protest. "I know it sounds impossible, but I've been thinking since I got here. Master Cartwright just bought us, which means he's low on funds. His cotton crop last season was poor. I've heard the overseers talking. He's vulnerable right now, financially." "And?" I asked, not seeing where this led. "And vulnerable men make mistakes. Take risks. We just need to watch for the right opportunity and be ready to move when it comes." It was mad. It was dangerous. It was probably impossible. But for the first time since I'd discovered the theft, I felt something other than despair. I felt hope. Over the following weeks, our little group began to meet in secret. Me, Celia, Samuel, Isaac, and Ruth. We met in the old tobacco barn that hadn't been used in years, late at night when the overseers were asleep and the plantation settled into darkness. Samuel, it turned out, could read and write, skills he'd learned before his kidnapping. Isaac knew routes north, had heard stories from his free parents about the network of safe houses and sympathetic souls. Ruth had survived by being observant, by learning the patterns and weaknesses of white masters. And I had knowledge. Decades of it. I knew every inch of this plantation, every rhythm of daily life, every personality quirk of the Cartwright family and their overseers. Together we began to form a plan. It would require patience, timing, an enormous amount of luck, and it would mean accepting that we might not all survive. But as Samuel said one night, his voice steady in the darkness of the barn, "We're not surviving now. Not really. We're just enduring. I'd rather die trying to be free than spend another 50 years enduring." We all agreed. The rebellion, because that's what it was, even if it was quiet and careful, had begun. Spring turned to summer, and the cotton grew tall in the fields. We worked from sunup to sundown, our hands bleeding, our backs aching, maintaining the appearance of obedient servitude while quietly gathering information and resources. The first breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Master Cartwright had a brother in Natchez, a lawyer named William, who visited twice a year to review the plantation's finances and legal affairs. He arrived in late June, riding up the long drive in a fine carriage, bringing with him ledgers and documents and the particular kind of arrogance that came with education and status. I'd served the Cartwright family for 71 years. I knew their secrets, their vices, their weaknesses, and I knew that William Cartwright had always resented his older brother's inheritance of the plantation. That resentment made him careless sometimes, made him drink too much brandy after dinner and complain too loudly about his brother's business decisions. Celia was serving at dinner the second night of his visit, and she heard everything. "You paid how much for 3 field hands?" William's voice carried from the dining room into the kitchen where I was preparing dessert. "Brother, that's twice the going rate. That traitor robbed you." "I got quality stock," Thomas protested. "Strong, healthy, overpriced," William interrupted. "And where did you even get the funds? Last I checked, you were barely covering your debts from last season's poor yield." There was a pause. Then Thomas said too casually, "Found some old gold coins during repairs. Must have been Father's emergency fund, hidden away." Another pause. When William spoke again, his voice was sharp with suspicion. "Gold coins? How many?" 43. That's oddly specific. And oddly fortunate timing, finding a forgotten fortune just when you needed it. William's chair scraped back. "You didn't find that gold, did you? You took it from somewhere. Or someone." My heart stopped. I stood frozen at the kitchen counter, my hands gripping the edge. "Don't be absurd," Thomas said, but his voice wavered. "Who would I have taken it from? The servants don't have gold, don't they? Some masters allow their slaves to earn money for extra work. Father did, if I recall. And you've got that old woman who's been here since Father was a boy. What's her name, Zelma? She does washing and mending for half the county? You think she never saved a penny?" The silence stretched so long, I thought my heart would burst. Finally, Thomas laughed, a forced, ugly sound. "You're suggesting I stole from a slave? William, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. They're property. You can't steal from property." "Actually," William said slowly, "legally speaking, it's a gray area. If you've been allowing her to earn and keep wages, essentially acknowledging a form of property ownership, then taking money she's legally accumulated could be considered theft. There've been a few cases in Virginia. This is Mississippi, not Virginia. The principle holds, and if she could prove the money was hers..." William trailed off, then laughed. "Though how would she prove anything? She can't testify in court, can't own property legally. Still, if word got out that you stole from your own slaves, the scandal would be..." "There's no scandal because I didn't steal anything," Thomas said firmly. "I found old coins during renovations. That's the story, and that's the truth." But it wasn't the truth, and now both brothers knew it. Celia reported all of this to me, her eyes wide with excitement. "Do you understand what this means, grandmother? He's worried. The lawyer brother made him worried." I did understand. Fear made men stupid. Worry made them careless. And a scandal, even the rumor of one, could ruin a man's reputation among his peers. I began to formulate a new plan, one that didn't involve simply stealing the gold back, but using the law itself, twisted and unjust as it was, as a weapon. Samuel was skeptical when I explained it that night in the tobacco barn. "You can't testify in court," he said. "None of us can. Our word means nothing against a white man's." "My word alone, no," I agreed. "But what if there were other evidence? Documentation." "What documentation?" I smiled, a thin, hard smile that held 78 years of accumulated cunning. "Master Cartwright's own ledgers. For years he's been noting the extra wages he pays me for work beyond my regular duties. Small amounts, but consistent. If those records show regular payments, and if the timing of those payments corresponds to the amount of gold that was found, it establishes a pattern, a possibility." "A possibility isn't proof," Ruth said quietly. "No, but it's doubt, and doubt is powerful. If William Cartwright is already suspicious, if other white people start asking questions, if there's even a whisper that Thomas Cartwright is the kind of man who would steal from his own slaves..." I let the implication hang. "He'd be humiliated," Isaac finished. "Might even lose status among other plantation owners?" "Exactly. And a man afraid of humiliation might be willing to negotiate." It was a long shot. It relied on white people caring about honor and reputation more than they cared about maintaining absolute power over us. It assumed William Cartwright's suspicions would fester rather than fade. It required us to access Thomas Cartwright's private ledgers without getting caught. But it was a chance. Celia volunteered to copy the relevant ledger pages. Samuel, with his literacy, would help her identify the right entries and transcribe them carefully. It would take time. Ledgers were kept in Thomas's study, and Celia would have to work in short increments when she had legitimate reason to be in the big house, when Thomas was away or occupied. It took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of Celia's hands shaking as she carefully copied numbers and dates by candlelight. 3 weeks of Samuel coaching her on handwriting and record-keeping. 3 weeks of my heart in my throat every time she slipped into that study. But finally, we had what we needed. 5 pages of records showing consistent payments to me over 20 years, totaling, when Samuel did the mathematics, almost exactly 43 gold coins. Now what? Celia asked, holding the precious copies. Now we need to get these to William Cartwright without revealing our hand, I said. That was the trickiest part. We couldn't directly approach a white lawyer. We couldn't mail them. None of us had access to mail, and the postmaster would report any suspicious activity immediately. We needed an intermediary. The answer came from Ruth. There's a free black man who comes through every few weeks, she said. Name's Josiah. He sells eggs and vegetables to the kitchen houses on different plantations. I've seen him talking with some of the others. I think he passes messages sometimes. Helps people. Free black people who helped enslaved people risked everything. They could be accused of encouraging rebellion and enslaved themselves. But some did it anyway, driven by conscience or memory or simple human decency. We waited for Josiah's next visit. I met him at the kitchen house, bought his eggs, and while examining them with my back to the door, I whispered quickly, I need help getting a message to William Cartwright, the lawyer in Natchez. It's about theft and justice. Can you help? His hands didn't shake as he counted my payment, but his voice was low and careful. That's dangerous talk, Auntie. I know, but it needs saying. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, put whatever needs delivering in the bottom of the egg basket next time. I'll see what I can do. No promises. 2 weeks later, I tucked the copied ledger pages into the bottom of Josiah's egg basket, wrapped in oilcloth to protect them. He took them without comment, without acknowledgement, and I had no way of knowing if they would reach their destination. All I could do was wait and work and maintain the fiction that I was just old Zelma, the kitchen slave who'd been here forever, who'd never dream of challenging her masters. But inside, I was burning with purpose. A month passed, then 6 weeks. I began to think the plan had failed, that Josiah had been caught or the papers lost, or William Cartwright had simply dismissed the evidence. Then, one August morning, William Cartwright's carriage came up the drive again, an unscheduled visit that had Thomas emerging from the house looking confused and worried. From the kitchen window, I watched the brothers argue on the veranda. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the body language, William aggressive and accusing, Thomas defensive and angry. The argument lasted 20 minutes, then both men went inside, slamming the door. That evening, Thomas Cartwright came to the kitchen house for the first time in years. I looked up from kneading bread, my heart pounding, my face carefully neutral. "Zelma," he said, his voice tight. "We need to talk." Thomas Cartwright stood in my kitchen house, looking more uncomfortable than I'd ever seen a white man look in the presence of people he owned. He kept glancing at the door, as if afraid someone might see him here, actually speaking to me like I was a person whose opinion mattered. "My brother has made certain allegations," he began, his hands clasped behind his back, "regarding money that was found during renovations." I kept kneading the bread, my arthritic fingers working the dough steadily. "Yes, sir? He seems to think, that is, he's suggested that the gold coins might have belonged to you, from wages you'd saved over the years." He laughed, but it sounded strained. Ridiculous, of course. "But he's threatened to make inquiries, to speak with other plantation owners about my integrity." I said nothing. Silence was often the most powerful weapon we had. "The thing is," Thomas continued, his voice dropping, "my brother can be persistent when he gets an idea in his head. And talk, even unfounded talk, can be damaging. So I'm prepared to make you an offer. A generous offer, considering the circumstances. Now I looked up at him. What kind of offer, Master Cartwright? He shifted his weight. I'll acknowledge that some of the money might have been yours. Not all of it. That would be absurd. But some. And in recognition of your many years of service to this family, I'm prepared to compensate you. 10 gold coins. That's more than fair. 10 coins. He was offering me 10 coins to stay quiet about the 43 he'd stolen. Every muscle in my body wanted to scream, to rage, to throw the bread dough in his smug face. But 78 years had taught me control. That's very generous, sir, I said carefully. But if I may ask, those 3 people you bought with the money that was found, Samuel, Isaac, and Ruth, what will happen to them? His face hardened. That's not your concern. But it is, sir. If that was my money that bought them, then in a way I'm responsible for them being here. It weighs on my conscience. I let my voice shake slightly, playing the part of the old, pious slave woman. Perhaps if they could be given lighter duties, or the possibility of buying their freedom eventually. Absolutely not, Thomas snapped. I paid good money for them, my money found on my property, and they'll work like any other field hands. This conversation is about compensating you for your service, nothing more. It was exactly the response I'd expected, but I'd needed to hear him say it. Needed to confirm that negotiation, that playing within their system would never lead to true justice. I understand, sir, I said meekly. 10 coins is very generous. Thank you, sir. He looked relieved, probably expecting more resistance. Good. I'll have the coins delivered to you tomorrow. And Zelma? This matter is now settled. No more talk about stolen gold or any of that. Understood? Yes, sir. He left quickly, and I stood there shaking. Not with fear, but with fury. 10 coins. He thought he could buy my silence, buy my complicity in the enslavement of 3 people for 10 gold coins. When I told the others that night in the tobacco barn, Samuel's face grew dark with anger. He's trying to make you part of it, he said. By accepting his money, you become complicit in his theft. It cleanses his guilt and silences you. I know, I said. That's why I'm not accepting it. They all stared at me. But grandmother, Celia said, 10 coins is still something. It's not nothing. We could what? Buy freedom for 2 of us while leaving 3 others behind? Buy slightly better conditions while staying in bondage? I shook my head. No. This isn't about money anymore. It's about dignity, about justice, about all of us getting free or none of us accepting these scraps. Then what do we do? Ruth asked quietly. I looked at each of them in turn. These people who'd become family over the past months, who'd trusted me with their hopes and their lives. We run, I said. All of us. Together. Isaac sucked in a breath. Miss Zelma, you know the odds of 5 people making it north together. We'd be slower, more visible. I know the odds. I also know that I've spent 71 years on this plantation, and I'm not spending whatever time I have left accepting crumbs from thieves. I straightened my bent back as much as it would go. I'm old. I'm tired. But I'd rather die free on the road north than die in bondage here. Samuel was nodding slowly. We'd need supplies. Food, water, warm clothes, maps, or at least knowledge of the routes. And timing, Ruth added. We'd need to choose a moment when we'd have the longest head start before they noticed we were gone. Over the next weeks, we prepared in secret. Isaac, using his knowledge from his parents' stories, sketched rough maps in the dirt behind the tobacco barn, memorizing the locations of rivers, roads, and rumored safe houses. Ruth began setting aside food in small amounts that wouldn't be missed. Hard bread, dried meat, anything that would keep. Samuel observed the overseer's patterns, noting when they were most drunk, most distracted, most likely to sleep through the night without checking the quarters. Celia gathered cloth and thread, ostensibly for mending, but actually preparing warmer clothes for our journey. And I collected the 10 gold coins Thomas Cartwright gave me, accepted them with downcast eyes and murmured thanks, then hid them in a new location. Those coins, combined with whatever we could carry, might buy us help along the way, might mean the difference between making it to freedom and dying in the attempt. The plan was set for late September, when the cotton harvest would have everyone exhausted and less alert, when the weather would be turning cooler. better for traveling but not yet dangerously cold. We would leave on a Saturday night after the overseers had finished their weekly drinking. We would head north toward Tennessee, using the stars and Isaac's remembered maps to guide us. We would travel at night, hide during the day, and trust in luck and the humanity of strangers we might meet. The odds were against us. We all knew it. Slave catchers patrolled the roads with dogs. Every white person we encountered was a potential threat. Any of us could be injured, could slow the group, could be the reason we all got caught. But we were going to try anyway. 3 nights before our planned departure, something happened that changed everything. A new overseer arrived at the plantation, a man named Crawford who'd worked on sugar plantations in Louisiana, where the death rate was so high that they calculated slaves as short-term investments rather than lifetime property. He was meaner than any overseer we'd had before, quicker with the whip, crueler in his punishments. Within 2 days, half the field workers bore fresh wounds. Isaac, gentle Isaac, made the mistake of helping an elderly man who'd collapsed in the cotton field. Crawford beat him unconscious for stopping work without permission. They dragged Isaac to the quarters that night, barely breathing, his back torn open, his face swollen beyond recognition. Ruth and I tended him with trembling hands, using what meager medical supplies we could gather. Celia held his hand and prayed. Samuel stood watch, his face a mask of rage and grief. "We can't wait until Saturday," Samuel said finally. "Crawford will kill him before then. Will kill all of us eventually." "Isaac can't travel like this," Ruth protested. "He needs time to heal." "He won't heal here. You know that. Crawford's kind don't stop. They push until people break or die." Samuel looked at me. "We have to go now. Tonight." Everything in me wanted to argue, to say we weren't ready, to insist we needed more time. But I looked at Isaac's broken body and knew Samuel was right. "Tonight then," I said. "We take what we have and we go." Celia's eyes widened. "But grandmother, we haven't finished. We never will finish. There will never be a perfect moment. This is the moment we have." I touched her cheek gently. "Are you afraid, child? Terrified? Good. Fear keeps you sharp, but don't let it paralyze you." I looked around at all of them. This is the last chance. If anyone wants to stay, to take their chances here, I'll understand. No one moved. No one spoke. But slowly, one by one, they nodded. We would go tonight. We would carry Isaac if we had to. We would run into the unknown with almost no preparation and very little hope. But we would run free, or die trying. The plantation settled into uneasy sleep around midnight. I lay in my cabin, listening to the sounds of the quarters, snoring, whimpering, the occasional cry of someone trapped in nightmares they couldn't escape, even in sleep. These sounds had been the soundtrack of my life for 71 years. Tonight would be the last night I ever heard them. Celia stirred beside me. "Is it time?" she whispered. "Soon. Wait for Samuel's signal." The signal, when it came, was subtle. The hoot of an owl, slightly off-key. Samuel had practiced it for weeks, making it sound natural enough that the overseers wouldn't notice, but distinct enough that we'd recognize it. We rose silently, already dressed in our darkest clothes, our few possessions wrapped in cloth bundles. I took one last look around the cabin that had been my home for longer than most people lived. There was nothing here I would miss. Outside, the night was thick with humidity and the buzz of insects. Clouds covered the moon, a blessing for hiding our movements, but a curse for navigation. We met behind the tobacco barn where Ruth and Samuel were already waiting with Isaac. They'd fashioned a rough stretcher from branches and canvas, and Isaac lay on it, barely conscious but breathing. His eyes found mine in the darkness, and I saw fear there and pain, but also determination. "Can you stay quiet?" I whispered to him. "We'll be moving fast and it'll hurt." He nodded weakly. Samuel and I took the front of the stretcher, Ruth and Celia the back. It was awkward, the weight uneven, but we managed. We moved through the plantation grounds like shadows, avoiding the main paths, sticking to the areas we knew best. My heart hammered so hard, I thought it might break through my ribs. Every sound made me freeze. A dog barking in the distance, a door creaking, the wind rattling through the cotton plants. But we kept moving. The property line was marked by a creek that ran through a stand of willow trees. We'd have to cross it, and the water would hide our scent from the dogs when they inevitably came looking. But it would also be cold, dangerous for Isaac in his weakened state. We reached the creek bank, and I looked back one last time at the plantation. Somewhere in that big house, Thomas Cartwright slept in comfort built on stolen lives and stolen gold. Somewhere out there, hundreds more plantations held thousands more people in bondage, grinding them down day by day. We couldn't free them all, but we could free ourselves. Into the water, I whispered. The creek was waist-deep and shockingly cold despite the warm night. We held the stretcher above the surface as best we could, but water still splashed up, soaking Isaac. He shuddered but didn't cry out. The current was stronger than expected, pulling at our legs, threatening to sweep us downstream. My old muscles screamed with the effort of keeping my footing while holding the stretcher steady. Celia slipped once, went under, came up gasping and terrified. But we made it across. On the far side, we paused to catch our breath and check Isaac. He was shaking violently from cold and shock, his teeth chattering. "We need to get him warm and dry soon," Ruth said, her medical knowledge gleaned from years of tending other enslaved people showing. "Or fever will take him before the slave catchers do." "There's an old hunting shelter about 2 miles north," Samuel said. "Abandoned. We can hole up there until dawn, get him warmed up, then move again." 2 miles. It sounded like nothing, but carrying Isaac through unfamiliar woods in the dark, it might as well have been 20. We moved as quickly as we could, but every step was agony. The stretcher poles dug into my shoulders. Tree branches whipped at my face. My 78-year-old body protested every movement, every breath. But I thought of my mama, sold away when I was 7. I thought of my husband, worked to death in his 30s. I thought of my daughter, dead because no one valued her life enough to save it. I thought of 50 years of saving, of hoping, of dreaming of this moment. And I kept walking. The hunting shelter, when we finally found it, was barely standing. 3 walls and part of a roof, filled with leaves and evidence of animal habitation. But it was shelter, and it was empty of humans. We got Isaac inside and started the dangerous work of building a small fire. Smoke could give away our position, but hypothermia would kill him for certain. We compromised with the tiniest fire possible, using dry wood that would produce minimal smoke. Ruth stripped off Isaac's wet clothes and wrapped him in the driest cloth we had while Celia and I tended the fire. Samuel kept watch at the shelter's opening, his body tense, listening for pursuit. "How long before they notice we're gone?" Celia asked quietly. "First bell is at dawn," I said. "When we don't show for work assignments, they'll check the quarters. Give them an hour to realize we're actually missing and not just sick or hiding. Another hour to organize a search party and get the dogs." I calculated quickly. "We have maybe 6 hours if we're lucky, 4 if we're not. And we've used 2 of them getting here," Samuel said grimly. "We need to keep moving at first light." "Isaac needs rest," Ruth protested. "Isaac needs freedom," Samuel countered. "Another day on that plantation would have killed him anyway. At least this way he has a chance." They were both right, and both wrong. There were no good choices, just different ways of risking everything. As the fire burned down to embers and Isaac's shaking slowly subsided into fitful sleep, I found myself thinking about the irony of it all. I'd spent 50 years carefully, methodically planning for freedom, saving every coin, making every calculation, trying to do it the right way. And in the end, freedom wasn't something you could buy or plan for. It was something you had to steal, violently and desperately, risking everything with no guarantee of success. "Miss Zelma," Ruth's voice was soft in the darkness. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, child. Do you really think we'll make it? Or are we just choosing how we die?" It was the question we'd all been avoiding. I looked at her honest face, at Celia sleeping with her head on my shoulder, at Samuel keeping watch with shoulders squared against the world, at Isaac breathing raggedly on his stretcher. "I don't know if we'll make it," I admitted. "I've lived long enough to know that hope isn't a guarantee. But I also know this: dying while running toward freedom is better than dying while kneeling in bondage. And maybe, just maybe, we're stronger and luckier and more stubborn than they expect." Ruth smiled, a small, fragile thing. "My mama used to say that our people were made of iron and prayer. That's how we survived when everything tried to break us. Your mama was wise. She was sold when I was 12. I never saw her again. I'm sorry." "Me too." Ruth looked at the dying fire. "But I like to think she'd be proud of me tonight. Running instead of enduring. Fighting instead of accepting." "She would be," I assured her. "Any mama would be proud of that kind of courage." We sat in silence after that, listening to the night sounds, waiting for dawn, gathering our strength for the next impossible stretch of our journey. Somewhere behind us, the plantation was waking. Bells would ring soon, our absence would be discovered. Men would saddle horses and leash dogs and come hunting for their property. But for now, in this fragile moment, we were free, and we were going to fight like iron and prayer to stay that way. Dawn came too quickly, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed obscenely beautiful given the circumstances. We extinguished the fire and roused Isaac, who was fevered but conscious. Ruth had managed to get some water into him during the night, and the rest seemed to have helped, though he was far from healed. "Can you walk at all?" Samuel asked him gently. Isaac tried to stand with our help, but his legs buckled immediately. The beating had damaged something deep inside, and the night's journey had made it worse. "We'll carry you," Celia said firmly, though I could see the fear in her eyes. We all knew what it meant to be slowed down this much. We fashioned the stretcher again and set out as the sun climbed higher. Our plan was to stay parallel to the main road north, but hidden in the forest, using the road only as a guide. Samuel led, using Isaac's remembered maps and the position of the sun to navigate. The first few hours passed in tense silence, broken only by our labored breathing and the sounds of the forest. Every bird call made us freeze. Every distant sound could be dogs, could be hunters, could be the end. Around midday we heard it, the unmistakable baying of hounds in the distance. "They're on our trail," Samuel said, his voice tight. "We need to move faster." But we couldn't move faster, not with Isaac. We were already pushing our bodies beyond their limits. "Leave me," Isaac said weakly from the stretcher. "You'll have a chance without—" "No," I said firmly. "We all go or none of us go." That was the agreement. "Miss Zelma's right," Ruth said. "We're not leaving anyone behind." The dogs sounded closer. We could hear men's voices now, shouting to each other. "There," Samuel pointed to a rocky outcrop ahead. "If we can get to those rocks, we might be able to hide our trail. The dogs can't track on stone." It was our only chance. We stumbled forward, my old heart feeling like it would burst, my arms screaming from the weight of the stretcher. Behind us, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. We reached the rocks and climbed onto them, dragging the stretcher up after us. Samuel led us across the stone surface to where water trickled down from a spring, forming a small stream. "Into the water," he commanded. "Walk upstream. Don't touch the banks." We waded into the icy water, holding Isaac above the surface. The stream bed was treacherous with slippery stones, and every step was a battle against falling. But we pushed on, following the water upstream for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Finally, Samuel directed us out of the stream and into a thick stand of pine trees where the ground was carpeted with needles that wouldn't hold footprints. We collapsed in exhaustion, listening. The dogs passed below us, their baying confused now, circling where we'd entered the stream. The men cursed and shouted, trying to pick up the trail. "Split up!" we heard one of them yell. Crawford's voice I recognized with a chill. "They can't have gone far. Find where they came out of the water." We held our breath, holding perfectly still. Isaac trembled on the stretcher. Whether from fever or fear, I couldn't tell. For an hour, we listened to them search. They came close. So close I could hear Crawford's breathing as he passed just yards from our hiding spot. But the pine needles did their job, and eventually the sounds of the search party moved off toward the west. We waited another hour before we dared to move, making sure it wasn't a trap, that they weren't waiting for us to reveal ourselves. "They'll be back," Samuel said quietly, "and they'll bring more men. We need to put as much distance as possible between us and this area before nightfall." We traveled the rest of that day in a daze of exhaustion and terror. Isaac's condition worsened. His fever climbed, and he began drifting in and out of consciousness. Ruth did what she could, but without medicine or proper rest, there was only so much anyone could do. As darkness fell, we found ourselves at the edge of a small town. We'd been avoiding settlements, but we desperately needed supplies and information. "I'll go," Celia volunteered. "I look the youngest, least suspicious. If anyone stops me, I can say I'm on an errand for my master." Every fiber of my being wanted to refuse, to keep her safe with us. But she was right. She had the best chance of passing unnoticed. "Be careful," I whispered, embracing her. "Don't take any risks." She slipped into the town as full darkness fell. The rest of us waited in an agony of worry, hidden in the tree line, watching the lights of the houses and wondering if we'd just sent Celia into a trap. An hour passed, then 2. I was about to insist we go look for her when she materialized out of the darkness, carrying a bundle. "Food," she said breathlessly, "and medicine. There's a free black family on the edge of town. I found their mark, the quilt pattern Josiah told us about. The woman there helped me, gave me supplies, and told me there's a safe house 2 days north, if we can make it." 2 days. It seemed impossible, but we had to try. That night, we fed Isaac the medicine, willow bark tea for fever and infection. We ate the food Celia had brought, real food, not the scraps we were used to, and felt our strength return slightly. "Tell me about the north," Isaac said weakly, his fever-bright eyes on me. "Tell me what it's like to be free." The truth was, I didn't know. I'd never been free a day in my life, but I'd heard stories, whispered in the quarters late at night, passed from person to person like precious heirlooms. "I've heard there are cities where black people walk in the streets with their heads held high," I said softly, "where children go to school and learn to read and write, where you can work for wages that you keep, where you can choose your own name, where you can say no without being beaten for it." "Sounds like heaven," Isaac murmured. "Sounds like what should be," Ruth corrected. "Sounds like what we deserve, what everyone deserves." We traveled the next 2 days in a blur. The pursuit picked up again. We could hear dogs in the distance, could see riders on the roads. But we kept moving, kept pushing forward. Isaac held on longer than any of us thought possible, his will to live stronger than his broken body. But on the afternoon of the second day, as we neared the safe house Celia had been told about, his breathing changed. We stopped and laid him gently on the ground. Ruth checked his pulse, felt his forehead, and when she looked up, her eyes were full of tears. "He's dying," she said simply. "No," Celia whispered. "No, we're so close." But Isaac smiled, a peaceful expression that seemed wrong on his pain-racked face. "It's all right," he said, his voice barely audible. "I made it out. I died free. That's more than most of us get." "Isaac, Isaac, don't," Samuel said, his voice breaking. "We need you. We're going to make it to the safe house." "You're going to see the north?" But Isaac's eyes were already glazing over, looking at something beyond us, beyond this forest, beyond this world of pain and bondage. "Tell them," he whispered. "Tell them I ran. Tell them we all ran together. Tell them." His breath rattled. "Tell them we were brave." And then he was gone. We sat there in the forest, the 4 of us surrounding his body, and for the first time since we'd left the plantation, we wept openly. Not quietly, not carefully, but with great heaving sobs that came from 78 years of accumulated grief, from lifetimes of loss and suffering and stolen dignity. We wept for Isaac, gentle Isaac who'd been kidnapped from freedom and who'd fought so hard to reclaim it. We wept for everyone we'd lost. Parents sold away, children worked to death, spouses broken by brutality. We wept for ourselves, for the impossibility of what we were attempting, for the knowledge that even if we made it north, we'd carry these scars forever. But then Ruth stood up, wiping her face with fierce determination. "We have to move. We have to finish this, for him." She was right. The dead couldn't run anymore, but the living still could. We buried Isaac as best we could in the forest floor, covering him with leaves and stones. It wasn't proper, wasn't right, but nothing about our lives had ever been proper or right. Samuel spoke words over him, not from any Bible, because none of us had one, but from his heart. "You were born free and died free, even if the years between were stolen. That's what we'll remember. That's what we'll carry." Then we moved on, the 4 of us now, lighter without the stretcher, but heavier with grief. The safe house was a small cabin set back from a dirt road, marked with the quilt pattern Celia had been told to look for. We approached cautiously as night fell, not knowing if the information had been reliable or if it was a trap. An elderly white woman answered our knock, a Quaker we learned later, one of the few white people who believed bondage was a sin against God and humanity. She took one look at our exhausted, grief-stricken faces and ushered us inside without a word. Inside, there were two other runaways, a young man and his sister, both from Alabama. The woman, whose name was Margaret, fed us hot soup and bread, gave us clean clothes, and tended to our wounds without asking questions we couldn't safely answer. "You'll rest here tonight," she said in her quiet, firm voice. "Tomorrow night my husband will take you in the wagon to the next station. From there, it's 3 more stops to the Ohio River. Once you cross that, you're in free territory." Free territory. The words seemed impossible. Like a dream I'd had so many times, it had lost meaning. That night, sleeping on a real bed for the first time in my life, I dreamed of Isaac walking through a field of cotton that never needed picking, where the bolls transformed into white flowers that released their seeds to the wind. In the dream, he was young again, whole again, and when he smiled at me, it was with joy I'd never seen on any enslaved person's face. I woke with tears on my cheeks and found Celia watching me. "I'm scared, grandmother," she whispered. "Isaac died running toward freedom. What if we die too? What if we make it all the way to the river and then we die free?" I said, echoing Isaac's last gift to us. "Child, I've lived 78 years, and most of them were lived for other people, for masters who owned my body, for a system that said I was property. These last few days, running, scared, hungry, grieving, these have been the first days I've lived for myself. If they're my last days, they're still worth it." Celia was quiet for a long moment. Then, "When we get north, if we get north, what will you do?" I hadn't let myself think that far ahead. Surviving the next day had consumed all my planning capacity. But now, in this safe place, with freedom tantalizingly close, I let myself imagine. "I think I'll sit down," I said finally. "Sit down somewhere without asking permission. Maybe by a river or in a park or on a bench in a city street. I'll sit down and I'll rest. And I'll know that when I stand up again, it'll be because I chose to, not because someone commanded me." "That's all?" Celia sounded almost disappointed. "That's everything," I corrected. "Choice, agency, the right to rest. Those are things I've never had. They seem small, but they're the whole world." The next 3 stops passed in a blur of kind faces and frightened hiding, of wagons with false bottoms and barns with hidden rooms. The network of people helping runaways was larger and more organized than I'd imagined. White people and free black people risking fines, imprisonment, even death to help strangers reach freedom. At each stop, we heard news. The Cartwrights had posted rewards for our capture, $200 for me, $150 for Samuel, $100 each for Ruth and Celia. We were wanted criminals, thieves who'd stolen ourselves. We also heard that 3 other enslaved people from nearby plantations had run after hearing about our escape. That Crawford, the vicious overseer, had been fired after beating another man to death in the fields. That Thomas Cartwright was drinking heavily and had quarreled publicly with his brother William over the slave problem. Our running had caused ripples, small rebellions in a system that depended on submission. Finally, on a cold October night, we reached the Ohio River. Our guide, a free black man named Thomas, led us to a spot where the river ran narrow and a boat waited. "That's Ohio on the other side," he said, pointing across the dark water. "That's freedom, but it's still dangerous. There are slave catchers who cross the river, bounty hunters who don't respect the law. You'll need to get to Canada eventually to be truly safe." Canada. Another impossible distance. But first, we had to cross this river. The boat was small, barely big enough for the 4 of us. Thomas pushed us off from shore with whispered blessings and disappeared back into the night. Samuel and Ruth took the oars, their strokes steady despite their exhaustion. Celia and I sat in the middle, holding each other, watching the shoreline of Mississippi, of bondage, recede behind us. The crossing took maybe 20 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. Every ripple in the water could be pursuers. Every sound from shore could be dogs or guns. But then, The boat scraped against the far shore, and Thomas's voice came from the darkness. "Welcome to Ohio. Welcome to freedom." We climbed out of the boat on trembling legs and stood on free soil for the first time in our lives. I looked up at the stars, the same stars that had shone over the plantation, over my entire life of bondage, and they seemed different somehow, brighter, more numerous, like the sky itself was celebrating with us. Ruth dropped to her knees and kissed the ground. Samuel stood with his arms raised to the sky, tears streaming down his face. Celia held my hand so tightly I thought my old bones would break, but I didn't care. We had made it. Against all odds, against all reason, we had made it. "Grandmother," Celia said wonderingly, "we're free." And I realized something in that moment. The gold didn't matter. The 43 coins I'd saved for 50 years, the 10 coins Thomas had given me as guilt payment, all of it was irrelevant. Freedom wasn't something you could buy or steal or earn. Freedom was something you claimed, violently and desperately, risking everything for a chance at everything. "Yes, child," I said, my voice strong despite my tears. "We're free, and we're never going back." We still had a long journey ahead of us, to Canada, to true safety, to building new lives from nothing. We'd carry the scars of bondage forever, would wake from nightmares for years to come, would mourn Isaac and all the others who didn't make it, but we would do it as free people, free to choose our paths, free to speak our truths, free to sit down and rest when we chose to. As we walked away from the river into our new lives, I thought about my mama's words from 71 years ago. "Save something for yourself, Zelma, even if it's just a penny, even if it's just a dream." I'd saved more than pennies. I'd saved my humanity, my dignity, my right to say no to injustice. And I'd used it to buy something no amount of gold could purchase. Freedom for myself and 3 other souls. That was worth more than 43 coins. That was worth everything. Behind us, the river flowed on, carrying our story with it. A story of courage and resistance, of elderly women and young dreamers who refused to die in chains, who chose the dangerous hope of freedom over the safe certainty of bondage. We were free, and our story was just beginning. The end.